In 1922, on an isolated farm in the Bavarian countryside, 6 people were murdered in a single night. But this is not an ordinary murder story. Before it happened, the family heard footsteps in the attic and found tracks in the snow that led to the farm, but never a way. Someone had been living in their house. And after the killings, that person didn't run. They stayed for days, feeding the animals and lighting the fire, surrounded by the dead. 100 years later, no one knows who it was. This is Hinterkaifeck. 60 kilometers north of Munich, in the flat, empty farmland of Bavaria, a small cluster of dark wooden buildings stood completely alone in the fields. It was called Hinterkaifeck. Not a village, not even a hamlet, just one isolated farmstead, far from the nearest town, surrounded on every side by open ground. To reach it, you had to walk a long way from the nearest village, across muddy tracks and bare fields. Almost no one made that walk without a reason. The year was 1922, and Germany was a broken country. It had lost the Great War 4 years earlier, and now its economy was sliding into chaos. Prices were spiraling out of control, and money was losing its value by the day. In the cities, there was unrest, and in the countryside, hard, grinding poverty. On farms like this one, life was a constant struggle against the weather, the soil, and isolation. People were closed off, suspicious, and used to keeping their troubles to themselves. Hinterkaifeck was a working farm, cattle, a barn, a tool shed, and living quarters, all built close together. Everything a family needed to survive in one tight cluster. And in 1922, it was home to one family of 6. 3 generations living under one roof, far from anyone who might ever hear them. The head of the household was Andreas Gruber, 63 years old. He owned the farm and he ruled it. Those who knew him called him harsh, miserly, and cold. His wife, Cecilia, was 72. Together they had run this isolated farm for decades, rarely mixing with the people of the surrounding villages. Living with them was their daughter, Victoria, 35 years old and a widow. She did much of the work on the farm, and her life had not been an easy one. Victoria had 2 children, a 7-year-old daughter, also named Cecilia, after her grandmother, a quiet girl who walked to the village school and back, and a little boy, Joseph, just 2 years old, the youngest of the household, and a child whose very existence was tangled up in the darkness of this family. 6 people, one isolated farm, and beneath the surface of this ordinary farming family ran rumors so dark that the whole region whispered about them. The Grubers were not just isolated by distance, they were isolated by reputation. People in the villages avoided them, and not only because Andreas was unpleasant. Years earlier, something had come to light that was almost unspeakable for the time. Andreas and his own daughter, Victoria, had been accused of an incestuous relationship. This was not just a rumor. In 1915, both of them were actually convicted of it in court. Andreas served a year in prison. Victoria served a month. And when they came back, life at Hinterkaifeck simply continued as before. They went on living together on that lonely farm, far from the eyes of the law and the village. Victoria had once had a chance at a different life. In 1914, she married a man named Karl Gabriel, and for a brief moment there was hope of escape. But that same year, the Great War broke out. Karl was sent to the front in France, and within months, the army reported that he had been killed in action. Victoria was a widow before the marriage had truly begun. She went back to the farm, back to her father, and back to the life she had tried to leave behind. Then, in 1920, little Joseph was born. And here was the problem. Karl Gabriel had been dead for 6 years. He could not possibly be the father. So who was? The whispers pointed in two directions. Some said the father was Andreas himself, the incest continuing. Others pointed to a neighbor. That neighbor was a man named Lorenz Schlittenbauer. Victoria had named him as Josef's father in a legal claim, and he had been paying child support for the boy. Schlittenbauer reportedly wanted to marry Victoria, but Andreas stood in the way, a father who would not let his daughter go, for reasons the whole region could guess at. So this was the household at Hinterkaifeck. A convicted father, a trapped daughter, a child of disputed parentage, and a web of resentment stretching out into the village. A family with secrets, and no shortage of people who had reason to hate them. And in the final week of March 1922, that farm began to feel like it was being watched. The first warning had come months earlier from the family's maid. A woman named Crescens had been working at the farm. Then, suddenly, she quit. She refused to stay another night. She told people the farm was haunted. At night, she said, she had heard footsteps and strange sounds from the empty attic above her. Everyone assumed it was the nerves of a lonely woman in an isolated house. The Grubers shrugged it off. But she may have been the only one who got out in time. Then, a few days before the end of March, Andreas Gruber found something in the snow, a line of footprints coming out of the forest and crossing the field toward his farm. He followed them. The tracks led all the way to the farm. But here was the part that disturbed him. There were no footprints leading back. Whoever had come had not left. Andreas searched the farm, the outbuildings, the yard. He found no one. But the tracks did not lie. Someone had walked to his home through the snow and simply vanished. Around the same time, a newspaper appeared on the property. A Munich paper no one in the family had bought or ordered. It was simply there, as if someone had dropped it. Then the house keys went missing. The family searched. And later, the keys turned up again, in a spot where no one in the household remembered leaving them. Andreas noticed that a lock had been tampered with, and inside the tool shed, things had been moved. Someone had been getting onto his farm again and again. And then the sounds came back. The same thing the maid had described. Footsteps in the attic. At night, above the family's heads, something was moving in the dark. Andreas climbed up to look. He found nothing. No one. But he could not explain the footprints, the keys, the newspaper, or the sounds. Something was wrong, and he knew it. He told a neighbor about some of it. The footsteps, the feeling that the farm was no longer his alone. He was clearly unsettled, but he made one fatal choice. He did not go to the police. Out of pride or distrust or fear of attention given the family's past, Andreas kept the danger to himself. And so whoever was out there, in the forest, in the shed, perhaps already in the attic, was left undisturbed. Watching. Waiting. Growing bolder. On Friday, the 31st of March, the family's new maid arrived. Her name was Maria Baumgartner. She was 44, and she had come to start work that very day. Her sister had walked her there and then left, heading home. Maria stepped inside to begin her new job in the quiet house at the edge of the fields. She had been at Hinterkaifeck for only a few hours. By the end of that night, she would be dead, along with everyone else under that roof. No one living knows exactly what happened that Friday evening. There were no witnesses left, but investigators were able to piece together the rough shape of it. It seems to have begun in the barn. One by one, members of the family were drawn out into the dark, perhaps by a sound, perhaps by something staged to lure them. Victoria, the grandparents, and the 7-year-old girl. Each of them, it appears, walked or was led into that barn. And none of them walked out. The weapon was a mattock, a heavy farm tool, the kind that lay around any Bavarian farm. An ordinary object, until that night. Then whoever did it went into the house. In their rooms, 2 people remained, the 2-year-old boy and the new maid, Maria, who had arrived only hours before. They were killed where they lay. In a single evening, every living soul at Hinterkaifeck was gone, all 6 of them, and then came the detail that has disturbed people for 100 years. The 7-year-old girl, Kazilia, did not die quickly. Investigators found tufts of her own hair clutched in her hands. The evidence suggested she had lain in that barn, injured but alive, for hours after the others were gone. Hours in the dark, beside her family, while somewhere close by the person who had done this moved through the farm. After something like this, every instinct says the killer would flee, cover the tracks, escape into the night, get as far away as possible. But that is not what this person did. Instead, they stayed. And what they did over the next few days is, to many people, even more chilling than the murders themselves. The next morning, smoke rose from the farmhouse chimney. Someone inside had lit the stove and was keeping it burning, exactly as the family would have on any normal day. Out in the barn, the cattle were fed. Whoever was in the house had walked out, stepped around what lay in the straw, and calmly given the animals their feed. Inside, food was taken from the pantry and cooked. Meals were eaten at the family's table. The killer was living in the home of the people they had just murdered. The family dog was alive and unharmed, fed, watered, moving freely around the yard. Whoever did this had cared for an animal while 6 people lay dead nearby. Days passed like this. The postman came and left letters. A salesman stopped by. From the road, the farm looked completely normal. Smoke, animals, a dog, life as usual. Neighbors passed at a distance and noticed nothing strange, and that was the point. For 3, perhaps 4 days, the killer kept the farm looking alive. And now think back to the footsteps in the attic, the tracks in the snow that led to the farm but never away. The keys, the newspaper, the feeling of being watched. It points to something that has haunted this case from the start. The killer may not have come on the night of the murders at all. They may already have been inside, hiding in the attic for days before the killings, sleeping above the family, listening to them through the floorboards, watching them live their ordinary lives, eating their food while they slept, moving through their home in the dark. And the Grubers never knew. They felt something was wrong, but they could never find it. And then, after the killings were done, this same person didn't leave that house of horror. They settled into it. They made it their own. For days they ate at that table, slept under that roof, and tended the animals, surrounded the entire time by the bodies of the family they had destroyed. This was not a panicked robbery gone wrong. It was calm, deliberate, patient, as if the killer was in no hurry at all. And then, at some point, they simply walked away. Out across the fields, leaving the animals fed and the fire warm. And they were never seen. By the time anyone realized something was wrong at Hinterkaifeck, the killer was long gone, and the farm had been silent for days. It was the small things that finally raised the alarm. The 7-year-old girl had not shown up at the village school for days. The mail was piling up. The family had missed errands in the village. No one had seen a single member of the household for the better part of a week. On Tuesday, the 4th of April, a small group of neighbors decided to walk out and check on the Grubers. Among them was Lorenz Schlittenbauer. When they arrived, the animals were distressed. They had run out of water. The whole place had the heavy, wrong feeling of somewhere left alone too long. The men made their way to the barn and pulled the door open. And inside, beneath a covering of straw and a barn door laid over them, they found the missing family. 4 of them were there in the barn, It was a sight that none of those men would ever be able to forget for the rest of their lives. Inside the house, they found the other two, the little boy in his cot, and Maria, the maid, who had come to work and never lived to see a second day. Word was sent to the authorities. Police arrived, and soon investigators came out from Munich. The quiet farm became the center of a major investigation. One thing was clear almost immediately. This was not a robbery. A significant amount of money was found untouched in the house. Whoever did this had not come for valuables. But almost as quickly, the investigation ran into trouble. Curious locals had already swarmed the farm, walking through the scene, touching things, destroying evidence. Whatever traces the killer might have left were trampled and lost in the very first hours. The case was damaged before it had even truly begun. The Munich investigators threw everything they had at the case. They examined the bodies, the barn, the house, the grounds, trying to reconstruct that final night. But forensic science in 1922 was crude. There were no DNA tests, no reliable fingerprinting at the scene, and the evidence had already been contaminated. Over the following weeks, months, and years, the police investigated an enormous number of people. By the end, more than 100 suspects had been questioned. Neighbors, drifters, former workers, men with grudges against Andreas. They were brought in, questioned, released. Not one could be tied to the crime with hard proof. The investigators kept circling back to the same haunting facts. The killer knew the farm. The killer was comfortable there, and the killer felt no need to rush. As the trail went cold, the police grew desperate and did something that sounds almost unbelievable today. They sent the victims' skulls to clairvoyants in Munich, psychics who claimed they could speak to the dead and reveal the killer. The Bavarian police genuinely hoped the supernatural could solve what science had failed to. It produced nothing. And there is a grim footnote. The skulls were never returned to be buried with the bodies. They were later lost entirely during the Second World War. The investigation dragged on for years and decades, reopened again and again as new theories emerged. But it always ran into the same wall. No weapon definitively linked to a suspect. No confession that held up. No witness. Just 6 victims, an empty farm, and a killer who had melted away. In 1923, just 1 year after the murders, the farm was torn down. And during the demolition, workers reportedly made one last grim discovery. A mattock, the tool believed to be the murder weapon, was found hidden in the attic. The same attic the footsteps had come from. And with that, the physical place where it all happened was gone. But the question of who did it only grew larger with time. So let's look at the suspects. After 100 years and countless theories, there is still no proven killer. But several suspects stand out, and each points to a very different kind of horror. The first and most discussed suspect is the neighbor, Lorenz Schlittenbauer, the man who helped find the bodies, the man named as the father of little Josef. Schlittenbauer had wanted to marry Victoria and build a life with his son. But Andreas had blocked it, and the disputes had bred deep resentment. And his behavior at the scene was strange. By some accounts, he moved the bodies, even unlocked doors with ease, as if he knew the farm and what was inside far too well. He reportedly said he was searching for his son. Critics asked how he could move so calmly through such a scene, and why he was so familiar with a house that wasn't his. Schlittenbauer was investigated heavily, but there was never enough to charge him. And he fought back hard, suing those who accused him of the murders for slander and winning. The second suspect never appeared in the flesh. Karl Gabriel, Victoria's husband, the soldier declared killed in France in 1914. A man who, on paper, had been dead for years. But here was the doubt. His death had never been fully, certainly confirmed. In the chaos of the war, bodies were lost, mistakes were made, and men sometimes turned up alive. What if Carl Gabriel survived? What if he came home, years later, and found his wife living with the father who had abused her, raising a child that was not his? A man with every reason for rage, who knew the family, who could have hidden and watched and waited. A chilling theory, but there's never been hard proof he was even alive. The third possibility is a stranger. The footprints came out of the forest. The attic had been occupied. Perhaps it was someone with no known link to the family at all. A drifter or a disturbed wanderer who chose this isolated farm, let himself in, hid above them, and acted on motives no one would ever understand. And there is a fourth idea. Andreas Gruber was hated. The incest, the convictions, his cruelty, all of it was known. Some believe someone in the community took revenge. But that theory struggles with the same problem as the others. It cannot explain the patience. The days spent living there. The strange, calm comfort of the killer. In 2007, students at a German police academy reopened the case. With modern profiling and methods, they re-examined everything that had survived from the original files. They reportedly arrived at a most likely suspect. But they chose not to release the name publicly, out of respect for that person's living relatives. So even the most modern attempt ended not with an answer, but with a name kept in silence. The Gruber family has never received justice, and likely never will. Today, there is almost nothing left at Hinterkaifeck. The farm is gone. There is just a field and a small memorial shrine placed near where it once stood. 6 names: a grandfather, a grandmother, a daughter, 2 small children, and a maid who worked there for a few hours. Killed in one night by a person never found. The case file is technically still open. It is one of the most famous unsolved crimes in German history, studied by detectives, historians, and writers for 100 years. But the thing that keeps Hinterkaifeck alive in people's minds isn't only the murders. Murders, sadly, are not rare. It's everything around them. It's the footsteps in the attic, the tracks that led to the farm but never away, the sense in the family's final days that they were no longer alone in their own home. It's the idea that someone lived above them, watching through the cracks, learning their routines, eating their food, while they slept just a few feet below. And it's what came after. A killer who didn't run, but stayed. Who fed the animals, lit the fire, and lived calmly in that house of the dead for days. Someone who felt completely at home in a place where they had just ended 6 lives. That is not the behavior of panic. It is something far colder and far stranger. 100 years later, we know how they died. We know who they were. We know about the secrets and the suspects. But the one question that matters most is still unanswered. Who walked out of that forest, into that house, and stayed? We will probably never know. And the silence from that empty Bavarian field is the only reply we have ever gotten. So who do you think it was? The neighbor, the dead husband, or a stranger no one ever named? Tell me in the comments. And subscribe. There are plenty more true stories like this one coming.